Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
You're listening to Serious Privacy, powered by TrustArc. Here are your hosts, Paul Breitbart, Ralph O'Brien, and Dr. Kay Royal.
Earlier this year, the European Commission announced they will withdraw their proposal for a new e-privacy regulation, the European law that should modernize the rules for cookies and tracking. And at the same time, we see that in the US, state legislators are actually including restrictions on the sale of personal data in their laws, which also includes a lot of online advertising practices. So high time to catch up on what is happening around the world of cookies, and who better to do that with than Darren Abernethy, who is AdTech, privacy, and cybersecurity shareholder at Greenberg Traurig. Darren has a long background as a tech and communications lawyer and is also a former member of the TrustArc team. My name is Paul Breitbart.
My name is Ralph O'Brien.
And I'm Kay Royal, and welcome to Serious Privacy. So we are absolutely thrilled to have Darren here. All of us have worked with Darren and at some level when we were all at TrustArc together. So it's one of these other mini reunions having Darren here. So Darren, are you ready for the unexpected question?
I've been preparing for this my whole life, Kay. No idea what it is. So lay it on me. We're doing it live.
What's the worst style choice you've ever made?
Style choice. Are we talking computer fonts? Are we talking clothing?
I assume fashion style.
The thing about fashion is what is outre or out of style at one point inevitably will come back into fashion.
Except they can't really make the 80s come back, let's be honest.
I see your comment and I'm going to raise you an example because I think that in the 80s, well into the 90s, I wore striped socks. To be fair, I think my mother dressed me that way, but I just kept up with it for a long time. White socks had stripes on them, often in jean shorts or jorts. And I think that the striped socks are back in now. And I'm thinking jean jorts, I think, are primed to make a comeback too eventually. So we shall see. Those are some style faux pas, but maybe they were just visionary.
I'm picturing Darren in striped socks and shorts now.
I should make it a wager or something that if I lose the next privacy conference we go to, that's what I wear.
That's what you're going to be wearing, right? The Bermudans show up in shorts.
Well, as they should. And they could bring little grass as well, Bermuda grass.
Yes, exactly. Ralph, Paul.
Well, shorts and socks is practically uniform for a young man in England. Yes, I'm sporting my luscious locks and man bun today. No, I'm never out of fashion. What do you mean, Kay? Never out of fashion.
Yeah, you set the fashion. You set the fashion.
If I'm wearing it, it's on trend.
Fair enough.
I love it. I love it.
How about a yellow and black polka dot two-piece with a skirt?
Beautiful.
Skirts are like a kilt.
I feel like I need to know more.
This came with a blonde wig, and this was during a school play.
Thought you told me your first cosplay was going to be at the upcoming IAPP conference.
No, this was not cosplay theater.
Which is cosplay on steroids?
This is cosplay before cosplay was a thing in Europe.
Oh my gosh. Was it to the song of an itsy bitsy teeny weeny yellow polka dot?
Nope.
No, it was not.
It was to the song, to a Dutch version of Lola by the Kinks.
Beautiful.
Great song.
Very nice. I'm trying to think of the worst style choice I ever made because typically I don't really care about anybody else's opinion. So it'd be my opinion if it was a bad style choice. In fact, if my husband hates it, it's a default I'm going to wear it because But I did grow up in the 80s, so there are pictures of me in parachute pants and mini skirts with the zippers up the side and the off the shoulders like flash dance. Leg warmers, yeah, everything. All of that is there. The lopsided hair and the long earrings and the Huey Lewis cap and everything. That was in style back then. I'd have to say that lately, my worst fashion choice has been when I went to my daughter's medical school graduation. And if y'all remember that trip from hell that became multiple flights and seats and with the 3-year-old and everything, and we landed and they weren't there to pick us up with a car seat and they wouldn't carry the child without the car seat. I wound up going, I put on my dress that I bought to wear in the bathroom, but I didn't change shoes. So I had this calf length dress that was pleated. That's a bad fashion choice right there, but I thought it looked cute on the model. But I was wearing it with my big, chunky, high heel black and gold tennis shoes. So definitely a fashion choice, not to be repeated.
Fashion forward.
It was fashion something. I could move faster in it, though. Let's just say that.
We need the scrunchy, the slap wrist things, maybe some pop rocks.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, let's just go back to the 80s. I'm there.
You got to have the music, the movies, the characters, Michael Jackson, Prince. You got to have all of that before you can. They've tried to remake all of our good shows and movies. So the detective shows and the Dukes of Hazzards and all of that, they can't do it.
Fame.
Yeah, exactly. Fame, everything. You got to have the whole package for the 80s. You can't just do a bit and piece of it, no matter how much you can buy parachute pants in Target now.
Okay, for next year, if you are looking for stickers, remember our name, Serious Privacy.
Yes. I don't have time to order that one, although I might, but we don't need, we got good stickers. Let's just say that. So speaking of owning the 80s, let's talk about cookies that did not exist in the 80s.
No. Or did they, Darren?
There was no internet. There was an internet, but not really as we know it in the 80s. So maybe it would be helpful to level set with a 30,000 foot overview for folks who are not super steep in this universe. And we'll say, look, we had the internet come around, say the mid 90s, not exactly in the form that we know it today, but taking shape. You've got browser-based digital advertising has traditionally been effective because it allows companies to target an individual based on information known or inferred about that person. And this has been done historically by associating activities like clicks or conversions made via a website visitor's web browser with a web cookie, which is really just a unique alphanumeric name tag that is stored locally. And the way that I like to think of it, and that I've been describing it tongue-in-cheek for the last 10 plus years, is a cookie ID is almost like a name tag. Like, instead of knowing your direct name, your name is Jenny, it knows you as user 8675309, to quote the famous Tommy Two-Tone song, Jenny. So it's like that. We don't know your name is Jenny, but we know your name. We have an ID we associate with you so that if you are later recognized when you come back to the site, we see your name tag and then we can associate things with that user. So cookies are set and they are recognized by the operator. They can be set or recognized either by the operator of the website, so a first-party cookie, or a third party, such as an advertising network that places a cookie on an unaffiliated website unless the cookies have been blocked or reset. And so in practice, what happens is you have let's take an advertising network. They don't just work with one website, they work with hundreds or even thousands of websites, and they have their cookie on those sites. And when that same user goes to enter website A, website B, website C, their user 8675309 unique ID, alphanumeric ID, is recognized, and then activities they take on that site, what they click on, referral URLs, where they came from, inferred interest, what they do on the site, what type of site it is, etc., that can be stored locally in the cookie, and that can be used by advertisers to essentially put people into audience segments that they think would fit into their ad campaign. These are the parameters. This is what we think our target audience is. So we want to show advertisements to people who fit within these segments or these categories. And that's how at least desktop-based advertising has worked for 25 plus years. Now, what we'll maybe get into further, but at a very high level, is if a web browser, and again, we're speaking for the moment, just in the context of traditional browser-based digital advertising, which is powered and funded the kind of rise of the internet as we know it. If a browser no longer supports third-party cookies, then many companies will experience signal loss, quote unquote, which is really the absence of a cookie as the anchoring mechanism to store information about a browser's activity, from which possible user interests or demographic information can be inferred. Traditionally, cookies have been used to measure the effectiveness of an ad campaign, create audience segments, like we said, allow for targetable ad campaign parameters. This person appears to be, we believe this person is a sports enthusiast. We believe we wouldn't say this person, we believe this browser is associated with a book reader, or this is a female aged 30 to 45 who likes to shop at night, things like that. And you can take those insights and those segments, you can upload them or you can access them, even purchase them through a third-party advertising platform that pools the segments and pseudonymizes the information, user identifiers, and then target your ad campaigns that way and be more likely to engage with people who have a higher likelihood of engaging with you because you already have a sense that this is what their interests are.
I have a wonderful trivia question I always ask my law students when I teach class on privacy and big data and emerging technologies. What kind of websites would you have to visit to be the number one type of websites in order to be served ads for consumable electronics, like gaming systems, music systems, things like that? What kind of websites are the number one you'd visit?
Is there a right or wrong answer to this that you have in mind?
There is a right or a wrong answer. And I'm going to tell you pretty much everything you would guess is going to be wrong.
Okay.
So this tells you how savvy the behavioral advertisers are. The number one type of websites you would visit to be served consumable electronics are military websites. Because military, your housing's covered, your clothing's covered, your meals are covered. They have a lot of disposable income to spend for typically young single individuals, male or female, who are away from home for years at a time.
Fascinating. I'm glad you shared that.
So I guess the question is, why should we care, Darren? Because every website I go on has this wonderful message that comes up that says, we care about your privacy. We and our 1,000 partners care about your privacy. They care so much about my privacy. They're going to share my information with these 1,000 partners. And they give me lots of options of things that I can change. And I can, if I want to, press buttons. And it's all very transparent and open and completely reliant upon my consent, right?
You're fired, Ralph.
I would say, Ralph, that is a correct summation of the system that currently exists, including in particular in Europe, where we have the e-privacy directive and the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, that essentially puts a consent-first approach for any for the accessing or storing of information, not even necessarily personal data, just information on an end user's device, whether that's their browser or their mobile phone or potentially their watch or their CTV, whatever. That's the system we have in place now. But, what I see your comment, and I'll raise you why it matters, because let's say we get rid of cookies, which is what those cookie consent banners that you've talked about, you just referenced there, that are effectively required by European websites or websites that serve European audiences where you want to get opt-in consent, GDPR level affirmative opt-in consent, prior to storing any non-required, strictly necessary cookies or trackers. Is what if the cookies go away because the overall ecosystem changes such that the dominant browsers no longer support cross-site third-party cookies, or because users themselves block or opt out or effectively start to curtail the use and the inventory that's available through third-party cookies?
And of course, Google's been talking about this for a while, haven't they? Getting rid of the sort of cookie ecosystem and moving to a different type of tracking.
Absolutely, they have. And that was the big push for a long time there, was to deprecate support for cross-site third-party cookies and replace it with the Privacy Sandbox proposal, a series of APIs that would have different functions per API that were intended to, in a more privacy-enhancing fashion, replace the overall utility of a third-party cookie. What we're seeing is, even though that was essentially first delayed several times, and that's in part because of activities in the United Kingdom with investigation by the Competition and Markets Authority there that kind of controlled the time frame that the company you mentioned there had in relation to moving to deprecating support for cross-site third-party cookies or fully rolling out the privacy sandbox, the idea still remains that other browsers and that browser, Chrome and others, there's a slow drift one way or another away from support for third-party cookies and the amount of inventory and the amount of data that's available to advertisers that come from third-party cookies.
Is it fair to say that the cookies as we know them are actually very outdated, old-fashioned technology, and that more modern alternatives are available or should be available that ideally would also offer more granularity and control to users?
It's certainly the case that the use of website cookies nowadays differs from the original purpose, which is to effectively remember what you put in your shopping cart, things like that, recognizing an individual or a browser that comes back to a website so they don't have to enter their login information again, things like that. Whereas now, to use terminology by the Federal Trade Commission, I, of course, don't necessarily endorse it, but surveillance capitalism, things like that, where now, you have this perception that people are being tracked everywhere they go. They don't know who's tracking them. There's sharing of their information. There's creepy ads that follow you across the internet. Okay, so that has led to the regulatory push and the legal push to really focus on cookies and opt-out mechanisms and required opt-outs or opt-ins for Europe and otherwise. And I think what gets lost in this is that sometimes the cure can kill the patient. And so by having all this focus on cookies, at least with cookies, it's not a persistent identifier. It's not a serial number. It's not an IAM. It's not a number of things that you can't do anything about. Cookies are resettable. They're non-persistent. They're in some ways fragile. They're browser specific. You delete what you do. There are ways, of course, of syncing things across browsers and different platforms, but in and of themselves, by themselves, a cookie is unique to the device and the browser that you're on. Some of these solutions, and we can certainly go into them, it's like saying, hey, you said no cookies, and we're not doing any cookies. But actually, from a consumer privacy and consumer control standpoint, you may have less visibility and control over something like a web pixel or a conversion API or CRM-based advertising or any number of the other solutions that are out there. To answer your original question, I think the use of cookies has changed over time, but it's almost like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. And so I don't think cookies are the devil, but they're established and known, and that was the system we had, and there were certain controls built around them. Those go away or need to be otherwise populated or repurposed once we're using other solutions for this.
Just to be clear, you are suggesting that cookies are here to stay because they're the lesser evil of other technologies, such as, browser device fingerprinting, for example, that could be much more penetrative into the individual. From my perspective, and I'm going to speak here as a European, we've had it long established here that online identifiers are personal data. And for example, in fact, actually an online identifier might be more specific than my name because other people might share my name, whereas an online identifier is unique to me. And then once you add an effect of a number of devices and browsing and things that I might do online that I might not tell my nearest and dearest friends, all of a sudden you've got a lot of companies sharing a lot of data, forming quite complex, large pictures of people for things they wouldn't share to their nearest and dearest in every day. So I'm going to take the counterpoint there, Darren, and say lesser of two evils? Well, I'm not so sure.
Fair enough. And I think that there is a lot of salience to that point, and that's why I think cookies are not going to totally go away, and they're not first-party cookies were never going to go away. Third-party cookies, although not fully supported in all of the major browsers, there are caveats that come with that. What I think you're going to see is over time, the reliance on third-party cookies is going to be less and less. They're not going away. They're still going to be there. They're going to be an arrow in the quiver of advertisers and publishers, but so is an increased use of first-party data. So are things like the Privacy Sandbox APIs, Topics APIs, so are cohorts, so are contextual advertising, so is universal identifiers, and we could go on. So I think I certainly take your point that there is a lot to the sharing and the unknown things that go on with third-party cookies, but doing a putting them all next to each other in a firing line and comparing them, you might find that some of the solutions offered to third-party cookies themselves pose privacy and identifiability risks. There's no silver bullet, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no silver bullets. And it's clear to say there's a lot of people browse the internet and there's a lot of people's jobs riding on making money out of that experience. And there's a lot of the economy wrapped up in ad tech and that ecosystem. In fact, so much money, I would say. We've seen a lot of lobbying here in Europe against the new e-privacy regulation that we now know has been dropped from the agenda. And I think it's a big frustration over here in Europe that we did get that brand new GDPR back in 2016. And we were due to have an e-privacy regulation that was going to drop and harmonize with it.
The same day. Supposed to be the same day. May 25th, 2018 was going to be GDPR and e-privacy regulation. Yep. Not so much.
But now we've got to have successive presidencies being able to push it through till eventually it's been dropped from the agenda because of very effective lobbying from the ad tech industry. And now we're in this interesting situation here, certainly, where we've got this newer GDPR, which has updated consent and made things more transparent. We certainly can see a lot more banners to click on. You could argue that's bad for the user and annoying for the user. But then we've got this older e-privacy directive that uses different terminology, and there's enough, how should I put it, inconsistencies that companies will drive a bus through them. I mean, we've seen cases, and I'm sure Paul will back me up here, in Belgium and places like that with the IAB Europe, and looking at whether it's almost like a GDPR issue with consent and transparency, whether it's an e-privacy issue with putting things on a user's terminal device. And there's enough confusion that I think we're in a real mess over here. Is the answer American? Because we're seeing some interesting conversations out of California with this idea of the Californian CCPA and looking at do not track signals, do not track is old.
What do they call it now?
Global privacy control. GPC,
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Or even global privacy control. Either.
Yeah. So will the answer not come from Europe? Will it come from the US? So just as an interesting thought, where you think the US is in terms of their legislative and regulatory controls over online tracking, as opposed to what we're seeing over in Europe, which is, to be honest, a bit of a lobbying mess.
I think that's a really great observation. And I guess the only thing I'd push back on is I would say I don't think there is a consensus or unique American approach to this. We are dealing very much with a balkanized approach because in the absence of federal legislation, which we don't have in the data breach space, let alone the privacy space, you would think a data breach would be a great opportunity to have a 50-state federal solution because it's really quite annoying to deal with the different definitions. Fine, we can't even do it for data breaches notification. We don't have it for privacy as well because of various issues around preemption and other things. But so I guess the pushback would be, what is the American approach? You do have a number of states that have, as you said, for one, have adopted definitions around selling, or in California's case, sharing of personal information, selling being providing personal information, which to your point is very broadly defined now. Cookie IDs, IP addresses, unique identifiers, probabilistic IDs, anything that can relate back to a unique individual, even if the entity collecting particular data attribute doesn't have the full set of information that they would need, even if it's with an ISP, an internet service provider, an ISP that would be able to unlock, that's enough. That's how broadly defined PI is, or personal data is, under these laws. But in response, we have, when you sell personal information or personal data, you make it available to a third party for their own use, in some cases for valuable consideration, some cases for monetary consideration, in some cases for no consideration, as we see with the definition of sharing for cross-contextual behavioral advertising under the California Consumer Privacy Act, i.e. the act of making the personal information, the cookie ID, to continue our example, available to a third party is the sharing. And therefore that does trigger the opt-out right. And you can't be a service provider if you're engaging in targeted advertising, cross-contextual behavioral advertising, and you have to have contracts with these third parties now. So not to get all over the place, that's one state's approach. And you have other states. The majority of states take an opt-out approach, which is to say you can load those third-party cookies by default. They can fire your pixels, etc. And all fire by default as long as you notify people of this and you give them the opportunity to opt out of the continued provision of that information to the third party for their own uses. And if we want to say that, if you want to collectively say that's the general U.S. approach, is an opt-out, which has been the case with some of the advertising groups, the self-regulation industry groups in the past, the Digital Advertising Alliance and others, where it's an opt-out. Then I think it could be a viable approach, but would that be scalable for a place like Europe, which has a different definition of what consent is? Here, technically in the US, unless you're dealing with children or people under a certain age, the selling and sharing doesn't require consent. It requires, if you will, the ability to withdraw consent, to opt out of something. They may be irreconcilable in terms of having a global approach to this, but we shall see how things evolve. And even, by the way, it should be said that for states that don't have a privacy law, a distinct privacy law, we'll say New York. Last year, the New York Attorney General's office released a guide for businesses on website privacy controls, which detail their expectations around the use of cookie banners, formats, and wording, and avoiding dark patterns. The idea being that even though we don't have a standalone comprehensive consumer privacy law, we will use our unfair and deceptive, our UDAP, as they call it, unfair and deceptive practices, trade practices, to say that you deceived consumers by not giving them what you told them they can have in terms of being able to opt out, or if you put a finger on the scales of them not opting out, things like that. So we're seeing more and more use of that too, in the absence of a state privacy law, state AGs, attorney generals, using deceptive practices statutes to still enforce in this area.
Section 3 of the FTC Act aside, I think deception by design is a fascinating area. Looking at all of the nudge techniques that you would use to get somebody to say yes or not say no. I saw one for children the other day, which was fascinating. It didn't say, can I track you online? It said, click here if you want to see stuff that interests you. Click here if you want to see boring things that won't interest you. And that is a very deceptive way, because what's the child going to do? That's a very deceptive way of oversimplifying for their own benefit something very interesting.
But that's exactly the problem here, right? That a whole industry was built since the mid-1990s to try to get our data to do things that the average consumer is not happy with, that the average legislator is not happy with, that the average regulator is not happy with. I just looked up some numbers. According to Fortune Business Insights, the current value of the global ad tech market is above $875 billion US dollars, with the expectation that grows to $2,500 billion by 2032. So in 7 years, for something that all of us rather not have.
Yeah. I mean, there is the argument that it's parasitic, but there are other arguments that the ad tech industry would say, oh, we're just making sure that you get a tailored experience to see what you want, rather than, we'll send you adverts anyway. It's just a case of now we know what you like in terms of adverts.
So what about contextual advertising then, Darren?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of contextual. I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah, no, I know, but let's talk about contextual advertising.
It depends on the level of effectiveness that you're going for. The less data-driven data-driven advertising that you have, the less one-to-one or direct it will be. You'll have a lower hit rate, so to speak, if you don't. But there are things like contextual advertising, which really refers to programmatically showing ads to users based on the content of the web page that they're on. And so traditionally, contextual advertising effectively relied on keywords. So even though keywords don't necessarily always reflect the full context of a web page or an app page, but the practice has evolved. It's evolved in recent years. We're looking at, it's not your grandma's contextual advertising. So instead of targeting genres of publications or keywords, now we have artificial intelligence, we have machine learning, we have image recognition, we have natural language processing, we have these enhancements that allow for a greater understanding of the nuanced meanings of an entire web page and their full semantic context, mind you, with lightning fast speed. So what this means is for contextual ads version 2.0, advertisers can now have defined topics or keywords to display ads in really brand safe environments, places they want to be and the types of audiences they want to be in front of, and then make that relevant for customers. And then you have their ad tech partner, say demand side platform, will analyze each page in their entire network, of partners, and they'll scan those pages in real time, and they'll match the advertiser's ad with the most relevant content available, the most relevant publisher page, whether it's sports, gardening, like whatever it may be. And it all takes place in an auction within milliseconds. And so it may be a less viable solution for advertisers whose products or services lack a corresponding popular online content place where purchasers flock to. But for customers, for advertisers who do have more distinct places, and Kay raised a great point earlier about military sites and consumer electronics. Yeah, that's clever. And those are the types of insights that you're looking for that are being added as a layer on top of contextual advertising, so that it is something, again, I think it is absolutely an arrow in the quiver of advertisers and publishers going forward. It's just less directly data driven than some of the alternatives, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be a great fit for a lot of companies.
You mentioned that this real-time bidding takes milliseconds or whatever else. I just loaded up my Brave browser. It's one of the browsers that I use. I use several browsers for different reasons. And actually on the homepage, Brave gives me some statistics. 1,708,232 trackers and ads blocked. 6.3 gigabytes of bandwidth saved of my internet that I pay for. 23.7 hours time saved. That's a day of websites loading up. The delay from using that bandwidth to put in the trackers and that is blocked due to that bandwidth. That's a day. It's a day of life, 6 gigabytes of content, and almost 2 million trackers.
And how much CO2 would that be?
Exactly. I wouldn't say I'm a particularly heavy internet user. But these things do come with some interesting sort of economic points. So there's this whole industry out there. We started off using the internet. And I remember the early internet where there was that old advert on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog, right? Where the first thing anyone asked you was ASL, age, sex, location, because they didn't know who you were. You weren't labeled and tracked. Now, you could argue for many reasons, policing, intelligence, that's a really bad thing. You could argue for data protection and privacy, that's a really good thing. But money is to be made, right? Money is to be made. And therefore, if we no longer go out and buy newspapers, we instead go online and expect to find good journalism online. But good journalists don't come for free. Is online advertising the way to pay those journalists, or do we pay a subscription? And then if we pay the subscription because we want good journalists, now is it a case of, as they say in the EU now, pay or okay? Is pay or okay a viable alternative to marketing? Or even if I do pay, will I still get marketing?
According to the European advertising industry, it is a viable alternative because obviously they issued a report. It was actually released this week. And they come to the conclusion, surprised, that the average European consumer is actually fine with a pay or okay model.
So for every app that I'm going to have on my phone, I'm going to pay €5 a month for every member of my family to use that ad-free. So that's €5 times, say, 30 apps, times, say, 4 people in my family. That's the whole person's income.
I also don't believe that study. Okay, you're awfully quiet for being a Southern gal from the US.
But y'all are covering the important issues. Y'all haven't asked anything. The few points that have come to mind for me, one are some of the basics, like we're talking cookies here. When there's cookies laws and cookie requirements, they apply to any type of online tracker typically. So we're not just talking cookies. One of the other thing, but it's an easy way of being able to explain it. But I know if you're a privacy person with a company and you go to your marketing department and say, we can't have these cookies on our website, they're going to immediately default to another type of tracker. So you need to be clear when you're talking to them. You can't have third-party trackers for people that are tracking them across websites or their behavior online. Some of the others are, you mentioned pixels, which immediately makes me think of the Facebook pixel, which is what everybody thinks of now because of the court cases and the rulings that have come down about the Facebook pixel and how it was violating HIPAA. And OCR, the Office for Civil Rights under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, I think it's still in existence right now, actually had put out an edict that told companies that they could not have the Facebook pixel on their website. That was immediately appealed and overturned on the federal level, saying that OCR does not have the authority to ban websites from having certain technology on their website, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you're violating someone's HIPAA privacy rights just because it's present on the website. It was in some cases, doing that, but it is up to the website owner to be able to tell when and it is and is not violating privacy. So there's a lot that goes along with this, but y'all have hit the high points here. I guess what comes down to it now is consent. Consent should be able to be as easily withdrawn as is given, and it's not. You give consent for cookies, but trying to withdraw consent from cookies is astronomically difficult to do. And I think there was a company that just had some enforcement against it because it had it opt out, was requiring people to provide information that they didn't have to provide when they opted in. So why do they have to provide it to opt out? So different things like that. Protecting children is another thing. We glance past that a little bit, but these trackers load up on any websites. They don't know who's on that, if it's a child or if it's an adult. So they could be tracking children, and COPPA in the U.S. would let them do that if it is a general use website and they do not know that it is the data of a child.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really interesting all the ways that this comes together, but how does the industry survive then? Are we looking, I know you keep saying there's a lot of ammunition they have, but are we reducing the size of the target?
We are. And I'll give you another wrinkle as well, which is that a lot of these, just to stick with the US for a moment, we can go back to Europe or elsewhere too. But in the US, a lot of these privacy laws do not have a private right of action. You can't individually sue under it. Only the state regulator, which is generally speaking the attorney general for that state. Though here in California, where I am in the Bay Area, we have the first of its kind California Privacy Protection Agency, a privacy regulator. But what happens is under most of these laws, people can't sue if they believe their rights have been violated. So what you've seen is that the plaintiff's bar has gotten very clever and creative in trying to use kind of decades-old privacy laws to, and this is my editorializing opinion here, shoehorn modern internet practices into legacy laws. And so one key example of this
chatbots.
Sprinkler, like taking wiretapping laws that have been around since the 60s and were meant to prevent the government from literally tapping into the wires that, and I began my legal career, going on almost 20 years ago in telecom. And so I had to get pretty involved in this area. But we have wiretapping laws, invasion of privacy acts. California has one. Every state has one. There's a federal wiretapping act. And then there's all 50 states have a wiretapping or an invasion of privacy recording statute, about 12 of which are what they call all-party consent states, meaning that, under the federal standard, under 38 of the states, only one party in the conversation has to consent, and it's okay. So how about that? I'm the recorder, and I think it's okay. I don't have to get consent from the other party. But in about 11 or 12 states, depending on your reading of the state, some court decisions in a place like Nevada, all parties must consent. And so what the plaintiff's bar is trying to do is to say, hey, for the use of session replay recording technology on a website or certain chatbots or certain social media pixels, you are actually involving a third party who is listening in on the contents of the communications, or even not even that, but keeping track of who was called or received through IP addresses, trap and trace. And without going into excessive detail on it, using that to say you're violating the law, and we're trying to expand internet activities into these laws that do have statutory damages in some case, which is to say you don't actually have to prove harm or damages. The act of was the harm. And it sets certain fee amounts that then can be used to say, look, we think we have a class action possibility here. This would be big money for you. Or we can make this all go away with a settlement.
Yeah, just pay us $5,000 and we'll quit sending orders.
California Invasion of Privacy Act is one example of this. Also reviving and blowing air into the Video Privacy Protection Act, the VPPA, famous from the Bork era, going back to our initial conversations in the 1980s here, where if certain titles, video titles, are shared via, say, a pixel, a social media pixel, it shares the name of the video title and associate that with the individual who watched it on your website. Arguments can be made that technically, even though we're not dealing with Blockbuster anymore, technically that would infringe, in some courts with mixed success have adopted aspects of that to say, yes, that may violate the VPPA. So I just mentioned it as an example of there's the main state consumer privacy laws in the U.S. and there's other laws too. And there's a lot of evolution going on and what applies, who can bring cases and practices the companies need to consider if you're privacy professionals or your privacy counsel or whatever for a company, there's certain considerations you want to make on how you set up your website and the partners you work with and the vendor assessments you do and things like that.
That sounds like a good moment to spoil the fun because we are already over time. This conversation could go on for hours and hours. So I'm sure, Darren, that we'll invite you back to continue this conversation at some point because there is a lot more to be said. For now, thank you very much for joining us this week.
Thank you, Darren.
Thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Kay. Thank you, Paul. I'll see you all soon, hopefully in the not too distant future.
See you soon.
That was Serious Privacy.
This wraps up our podcast for this week. Please do share the episode with your friends and colleagues because we love to get more listeners. And join the conversation on LinkedIn or on Blue Sky. You'll find us under Serious Privacy on both platforms. You'll find Kay as Heart of Privacy, Ralph as IGR O'Brien, and myself as Europol B. Until next week, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, y'all.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No, that's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data and get credible, cited answers based on Nimity research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.